Greetings and welcome to the Voices Listed podcast show. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Colleen Hanley, a consultant, a facilitator, and interculturalist who brings a wealth of global experience to her work. Colleen is a dedicated volunteer with Nashipe Masai Initiatives, supporting sustainable community projects in Tanzania, in East Africa. And she also collaborates with Masai Eco Boma, an innovative ecotourism and cultural exchange program in Tanzania as well. Colleen is passionate about cross-cultural connection. Colleen helps amplify voices and build bridges across communities. I've known Colleen for such a long time as she works with local initiatives here in Canada, in British Columbia specifically. Looking forward to this conversation with Colleen Hanley. Colleen, it's so good to have this conversation with you today. And as we get started, where are you joining us from today?
Supai, Patrick, I'm wanting to let people know that I live, work, volunteer on the lands of the Comox people that in what is now called the Comox Valley on what is now called Vancouver Island, and one of the things that I have learned from the elders and my colleagues in the Indigenous community here is the importance of acknowledging the land in a thoughtful way. And as I was doing lots of thinking about preparing for this conversation, I got thinking about one of the lessons that I've learned around place names and the importance of place, and realizing that and reminding myself that I'm a member of an ecosystem that lives in this valley, and that I have a responsibility to all the other beings in the valley, and how I conduct myself, how I live, and those beings might include the rocks on the river close to where I live, and so I realize that I have lots of learning and frankly some unlearning to do around how I am part of this ecosystem, and then of course largely into the ecosystem of the world that we live in, and the community that I volunteer with.
Fantastic. Thank
Sorry,
you,
that
Colleen.
was a long answer.
No. That's beautiful, and thank you for that. I mean, I remember a couple of days ago you're sharing with me that you were sitting on your patio, or maybe in your garden, and you're sort of watching the salmon, do their salmon run, and that speaks to not just the rocks that you're talking about, but even what happens within the river ecosystem, right? And so you talk about names, and you talk about place, and that's so important too for me, even from in my own culture. I go back to remembering stories that my grandparents and my great aunts would share with us around the fire. After a long day of driving oxen in the field and plowing, and then taking cattle and goats out to pasture, and then we are back. We've had our meal and we are relaxing, and my grandparents would talk about the importance of names, the importance of not just names of places in the community, but names that we have as individuals, right? And we would be given, and it's something that I've carried to today, that I would get an English name or Irish name, Patrick, but also be given a Shona name, right? That helps me to locate my place in the community, my place in the clan. And so, yeah, thanks for opening up with that. And yeah, I mean, when I think about it, it opens up a whole lot of things, right? I think about the impact of colonialism on the destruction of names, right? And a quick thing that came to mind was, I don't know if you've heard of the Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, bordering Zimbabwe and Zambia. And, a great explorer by the name of David Livingstone got there and he said, "Oh, I've discovered these falls. I've discovered the Victoria, we're going to name them the Victoria Falls." But yet, for the longest of times, locals lived there. Locals continue to
Yes.
live in that area. It is called Mosia Tunya in our own language, right? And it's not Victoria Falls to us; it's Mosia Tunya because that's the name that we gave it. And so, thank you for starting us off by even just acknowledging the lands. And so that's important. And as I think about that and the way you were introducing yourself, I think about interculturalism, right, as an approach to cultural diversity, Colleen. Perhaps in so many ways that emphasizes what we would call sort of interaction and dialogue and mutual exchange between peoples, right? And I want to dig into, so there's interculturalism and then there's multiculturalism. So I'll dig into that sort of aspect later on. But can you take us back to the moment or experience that first sparked your passion for intercultural work?
I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I realized that there's several moments. There isn't that one moment.
Okay.
I think I started on this path when I had the opportunity when I was 21, just finished my university degree, and
Mhm.
I got a phone call from my Japanese and Chinese history professor who said to me, "There's this program that the federal government is operating that creates opportunities for young people
Mhm.
to travel to Japan for 3 weeks. Do you want to
Oh,
apply?" And I said yes,
yeah.
and applied. And I had the incredible fortune of being one of 35 people from across the country who traveled to Japan for 3 weeks and stayed in homes up and down the main island of Honshu.
Mhm.
um, it really it changed who I am in a number of ways, including my husband was also one of those students on
Okay.
that trip,
Okay.
and we've been together now for 50 years, so that
Oh,
clearly
congratulations.
had a big
Wow.
impact on my
That
life.
had an impact. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then fast track forward to coming to British Columbia, where I had the opportunity to work in both a counseling and community development role with the local community college. And
Mhm.
one of the things I was called upon to do one day was to travel with some colleagues from Port Alberni out to the Dididat Nation, close to the west coast. And I can still, and I still feel the chills. Remember sitting in a room with a number of other people where a gentleman who was about my age talked about his experience when he was taken from his family to residential school.
Mhm.
And I knew at an intellectual level about residential schools, but I had never, ever heard a personal story. And
Mhm.
the courage it took for him to share it with people who weren't part of his community,
Yeah.
and the responsibility I felt listening to that story and realizing
Mhm.
that my ancestors are part of that story and not
Mhm.
the positive part of that story at all.
Mhm.
It reminded me of, again, of that responsibility
Mhm.
of living and working and playing and volunteering across um, cultural lines where people see the world differently.
Mhm.
And then fast track further to this gift of an opportunity. I had to begin working with my colleagues, my friends, my dear friends now in Masailand in the community of Makayuni,
Mhm.
where I have the incredible honor of learning about their culture and building
Mhm.
relationships with the kids at the school and with the people who are part of the council,
Mhm.
with the people who work at the Masai Kuboma Lodge.
Yeah.
It,
So,
it it's
sorry, let me
just
pause you.
deepens my responsibilities.
Let me pause you there, Colleen, if you don't mind, because you just mentioned a little bit about the residential schools, and perhaps there's some people that are listening here and they're like, "Oh, residential schools, what was that?" Right? And so I just wanted to provide just a bit of framing for our audience here that perhaps from the 1800s, 1880s to the late 1990s, the Canadian government, in partnership with some Christian, mainly Christian churches, operated a system of what was called residential schools that were aimed at assimilating Indigenous children into sort of what you would call sort of Euro-Canadian culture, right? And so more than perhaps 150, if my memory serves me right, 150,000 First Nations and Métis and Inuit children were taken from their families, often by force, by brute force, and placed in this in these institutions. And really, the Canadian government would say the purpose for this was education, but really the deeper intent was cultural erasure, because children were forbidden to speak their language, practice their traditions, or connect with their communities. And so, again, from literature and history, and what I have learned is that life in the schools was marked by harsh discipline and neglect and widespread abuse, malnutrition, and disease. And so, again, just a really, really, really bad history that that we know, like things that happened that were so terrible, mainly because there was this desire to enforce Euro-Canadian sort of values upon the First Nation. So I just thought I would just frame that for someone who's listening and saying, "Hey, what are residential schools?" So basically, that's the bit of the background. Sorry to disturb your flow there, Colleen.
That's okay. And just because I know that you have listeners in many parts of the world,
Mm,
two things I want to add. Duncan Campbell Scott, who was the Minister of Education nationally at the time of the beginning of the whole residential school process,
mm,
believed his mandate was, and I quote, to take the Indian out of the child. And
mm.
when I hear that, it's frankly disgusting that that
Yeah,
is part of the history of this country.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and the other piece of the puzzle is that many years later, Canada finally began to understand the
Mm,
damage that it had done,
mm,
and followed the lead of South Africa and established
yeah,
its own truth and reconciliation process.
yeah,
And Marie Sinclair, a well
yeah,
respected Indigenous
yeah,
person who is
mm,
also a lawyer,
yeah,
and had responsibilities at a national level, led
mm,
6 years of conversation across this country,
mm,
where testimony was given by many of those people who
mm,
lived in those schools and those experiences.
mm.
And 94 recommendations came out of
Yeah,
that recommendation.
yeah.
And as one person, I as I read the results of that in that discussion, I put myself on my own path towards reconciliation. So
Mm,
have my own responsibilities around how I conduct myself and how I am
mm.
with my Indigenous colleagues, both here in Canada and in other parts of the world, including my friends and colleagues in Maasai land.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Let's speak a bit about even the friends and colleagues that you work with in Maasai Island. How did that connection come about? How did you find yourself connecting with community, with the Maasai community in particular?
I have a dear friend that I've known for almost 40 years now,
Mm-hmm.
who traveled to Maasai Land to go on a gaming tour. And
Mm-hmm.
when she and her husband came back from that, she was struck by the the reality of the Maasai people. Her guide, Mao, my dear friend Clamian Katisho,
Mm,
told her about the realities of his own community, the twice move from the Serengeti to the Ngorongoro crater, for the
mm-hmm.
Ngorongoro crater to the
Yeah.
land they're lived on now. And she needed to do something. And so she started working with him to see how she could walk alongside him and his community. And about 8 years ago, she and Clamian had been talking about the need for the Mekioni Maasai community to have a strategic plan, and I have a background in strategic planning. So she said, "Can you help us?" And I said, "Of course." And so we started Wednesday morning phone calls on WhatsApp. And
Mm,
as I asked questioned and did lots of listening and did lots of writing, over 4 months, together we constructed a strategic plan. And those Wednesday morning phone calls, they've now shifted to Thursday morning, but they continue 8 years later with a larger group of people who here in Canada and in the United States, and who walk alongside the community, work in partnership with the community to follow their lead in terms of where they're moving towards a new kind of sustainability. They cannot practice the kind of life they had when they were on the Serengeti, and they are creating a new way of being in this land that they've been placed on.
Okay, that's so interesting. So you come in to sort of work on a strategic plan alongside this community. So was the desire to have a strategic plan coming out of the community's own sort of praxis to say, hey, we need to have some sort of roadmap, or it was your friend who then said, hey, maybe this community needs, how did that come to life? Like, what was the genesis of having a strategic plan? 'Cause, I mean, this is new for me, right? To hear this. So
Yeah. The desire for a strategic plan came from Clamion, who chairs the Council of Elders, and so it came from him and the Council of Elders, not from my friend, not from me.
okay.
And as I understand it, the need for a documentation of a strategic plan, the Maasai and the Ma language is an oral language. It's not a written language, and so they would have had their own plans in an oral way, but not in a way that they could share with people who were visiting their community, with people that they wanted to seek out to walk, as you say, alongside them as they built this sustainability. So they needed documentation
That's
and in English.
Oh wow, yep. That's interesting. And so, in your work with sort of the Maasai community, with Clamion and his team, how have you been able to navigate, sort of, perhaps if I frame it this way, like authentic partnerships with, perhaps, either, cultural tourism or volunteerism? How has, and I don't want to dig into the sort of the meat of the strategic plan, because I'm sure these issues are addressed in there, but how have you been able to sort of navigate that line?
That's a really good question, because it's an ongoing conversation I have with the two women that I work most closely with here on this side of the Atlantic Ocean.
Sure.
Because we are dedicated, and as we recruit other volunteers, we are collectively dedicated to work in as decolonized a way as we can. And to work in a decolonized way, we have to, number one, take the lead from the community. We are volunteers, of course. And I don't often describe my work as a volunteer. I talk about working with the community. And so I use my skills, my knowledge, my understanding, my intercultural training in the context of the direction that I receive from the executive director, from the council of elders, from the headmistress at the school. They are in charge, and I work for them.
Yep, that's beautiful. And so, I mean, earlier on, I'd mentioned that there's just this dynamic between interculturalism and multiculturalism, right? With the latter, multiculturalism, in perhaps my view, often focused on the preservation, perhaps, of the distinctness or distinctiveness of the cultural identities, while interculturalism perhaps looks more into, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like, so looks more into facilitation and dialogue and meaning making, and importantly, what you said, right, that it has to be a sort of a mutual exchange between the different cultures and in society. Having said that, because it's a lot, right? It's and we don't have so much time on the podcast to unpack that. It's a lot. Like, when I think of, people to people relations, when I think of understanding, culture and community, there's a whole lot that goes in there. And as I begin, so you're talking about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and sort of the 94 sort of outcomes that came out of there. One of the things that I did within the first month I arrived in Canada was to actually buy as many books as I could on the whole process so that I would understand, right? And so my bookshelf there, I'm pointing two books right now that I can immediately see by Elder Joseph. One is the 21 Things You Need to Know about the Indian Act. The other one is by again Elder Joseph about Indigenous relations. And somewhere there are three more books there, and I just soak them up because I want to understand. I want to dig deep into history because that's important, right? And so, having said that, how has your deeper engagement with the Maasai culture changed you personally? What are the things that you say, hey, Patrick, like as I reflect, as I look back of my engagement over the number of years I've been, these are some of the things that have changed. What aspects perhaps of even Maasai worldview or practices have you integrated into your own?
I think that the first, and this sounds simple, but it's ongoing hard work for me. I'm a very type A personality. I like to get things done.
Yeah.
And
I know that
you know
about
that
you.
about me.
Yeah.
You know that about me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the sayings that exists all over Tanzania and is
Yeah.
very much part of the reality of the Maasai culture and the Maasai community that I volunteer with is this
Yeah.
saying of pole pole. And
Yeah.
pole pole means slowly, slowly.
Slowly, slowly.
And
Yeah.
so and 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 it's most powerful when there's a frustration around wanting to get things done
Mm,
and people or ideas or time or money is in
mm,
the way and you can't just
mm-hmm,
get things done. And so
mm-hmm.
I can hear Clamian, I can hear Christopher, I can hear Naishe in my head saying, "Pole pole, just
Yeah.
slow down, just
Yeah.
let things evolve." Um,
Mm,
and so that's a powerful lesson for me in the
mm,
context of my work, but also in context of my day-to-day life.
yeah.
I also I've because of my intercultural studies, I one of the researchers that I follow a lot is a fellow
Mm,
named Hofstede, and he talks about high context, low context cultures. He talks about individualism vis-a-vis collectivism, and
mm-hmm.
one of the things that I experience both when I'm in the community and when I'm on WhatsApp
Yeah.
is this high context way of being, meaning that rather than just saying everything that needs to be done, people
Mm-hmm.
imply, suggest how things might be done, um,
Mm-hmm.
and things are done in a collective way. They're not
Sure.
done for the individual. It's always about the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's never about the individual. I remember sitting in a council of elders meeting where they were trying to decide what their priorities were, and I
Mm-hmm.
and I watched Clamian and the chief of the community ask every person sitting around in the circle what they thought, and everybody listened carefully to what everybody
Mm,
had to say. So
yeah.
that's another piece is spending more time listening, less time
Yeah.
talking,
Yeah.
spending more time asking questions that are thoughtful and less
Yeah.
time having opinions.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Colleen, and thank you for sharing that, right? Like, I reflect too on this notion of things are done for the community and not an individual, right? And for me, that's sort of a real big distinction, right? And having lived in the Northern Hemisphere or in the global North for a number of years now, I'm still boggled by the fact that it's always about me and me and me and me and me and not us, right? And so I have in so many ways been sort of challenging this notion. Perhaps it's still this cultural upbringing that's so heavy and strong in me that it's about all of us, right? And I think about Ubuntu, that I am because we are. It's about all of us being able
Mhm.
to move
Yeah.
forward. And so, yeah, thank you for would maybe, for a lack of a better descriptor, thank you for adopting that way of being, right? That it's not just about me as an individual, but it's about all of us and how we can collectively move forward together. I do you see that? And I'm asking for a friend here, right? Do you see that this notion of individualism is going to change at some point in the global north, or it's something that's just going to continue? I don't know. What are your thoughts around that?
I see seeds of a more collectivist way of living in the world,
Mm-hmm.
um, in some of the political decisions that are made
Mm-hmm.
um, at a national level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some of our political leaders are some of their messages are collectivist in their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I have a Scandinavian background on my mother's side, and I
Mm-hmm.
definitely, when I look at the politics of Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark,
Mm-hmm.
I see a much more collectivist
Mm-hmm.
approach than perhaps our neighbors to the south.
Mm-hmm.
Um, will we move in that direction? People have talked about the next century is the century where Africa will shine,
Mm-hmm.
and there's many countries in Africa, and many of those countries practice a more collectivist culture.
Yeah.
So maybe we will see the leadership um, come forward from Africa. Certainly, the truth and reconciliation work here in our country in South Africa,
Mm-hmm.
um, Indigenous peoples, as I understand the Indigenous cultures that I have had an opportunity to connect with,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
function much more in a collectivist way. So
Yeah.
I come from my glass is half full
Yep.
frame of
I love
seeing the
it.
world,
Yeah.
and so
Uh-huh.
I hope and wish and seek leadership that will bring us to a more we're in it together world,
Yep.
that ecosystem that I talked about
Yep.
living in, that
Yep.
I am part of, I'm not in charge
Mm-hmm.
of.
Yep. 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 I love that framing. And so perhaps I wanted to well, not so much pushback, but well, perhaps pushback and ask this question, because you brought in this notion of political leadership, right? Is it incumbent on political leadership to bring in sort of the community-centered approach, or could we as community leaders, could we as members of the community model that, and then the political leadership then take a leaf from what community, what's your, I'm interested in your perspective there, right? Should we wait for someone to set the tone for us, or should we, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, right, be able to take care of one another, be respectful, be kind, be empathetic, and not take cue from political leadership? Is there space for that? Or Patrick should just, well, you know what, until my premier, decides to, take some sort of community-centered approach, or until the prime minister decides to do that, I'm not going to do that. What's your take on that?
I have a friend, a colleague, a dear friend,
Uh-huh.
who taught me the concept yes and
Uh-huh.
so my answer to that question is yes and.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, we need to see our political leaders
Mm-hmm.
take a collectivist approach, take an approach of meeting the needs of the entire community, and not be driven by the economic growth as the sole reason for doing work. And
Mm.
yes, we as individuals, we as people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, need to also take on that responsibility of supporting and encouraging each other, of moving forward with things that we want to grow and develop in our community. So I think all the different roles that exist
Mm.
need to move together in a way that supports community and supports each other at a local level, right through to what is going on
Mm.
at an international level.
I love it. I love it. One of my mentors taught me not yes and, but taught me both and. So I love, and it all sort of points us in the same direction too. So
Yeah.
I just love it, right? That yeah, yes and. So there can be political leadership, but as community, we can also be able to move forward. Thank you so much, Colleen. You always bring in insights and sort of a depth of clarity on matters whenever we speak together. And so we're coming to the top of our time, but before I let you go, I've got one question. If you've listened to my podcast, you would expect this question to come in. So if you were to have lunch or dinner with three people, either living or dead, who would they be and why?
Hmm. The first person that comes to my mind is my father.
Mm,
He passed when I was 12, and there is so many things that I want to know about his life and about the way
mm,
he saw the world.
mm,
And so that would be the first person that I would want to
mm.
have. It's very personal, and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
clearly it's
No,
emotional.
it's okay. Yeah.
Um,
Mm,
yeah. Thinking more broadly,
mm.
I think I would like to have time with Emily Carr,
Aha. Yeah.
who painted up and down, who painted so many
Mm,
imaginative, interesting,
yeah.
engaging
Mm,
works up and down the coast of British Columbia.
yeah.
I go to the art gallery in Vancouver and sit and stare at her work and wondered
Yeah.
what she was thinking and
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah. Her
So
work
it
is
would be
beautiful.
fascinating to have a conversation with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think if I had the honor and the privilege, I would actually love to sit and listen to Desmond Tutu. He
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
he and he and the work that he did in South
Mm,
Africa, the ground he laid for a
mm,
way for us to move forward in terms of
mm,
truth and reconciliation here in Canada, and I suspect
mm.
that will reverberate in other parts of the world in years to come. It would
Yeah.
be interesting to hear what he might have to say.
Mm, mm. Wow. An amazing list of people, and each of them, bringing such a connection to your life, and I'm not surprised too that you'd have those folks on your list because of who you are, Colleen. You're an amazing human being, a strategic consultant, a facilitator, an interculturalist. I always marvel in the different meetings that we sit, and one of them where you're board chaired, how you facilitate meetings, make space for everyone to be heard, but also still be able to drive along the agenda or drive along the objectives of the meeting. And so, Colleen, thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for, importantly, who you are, not only to myself and to colleagues that we work with in the different aspects we connect, aspects of work we connect, but broadly even to the world. The world is a better place because people like you exist, people that hold space, people that listen, and people that are there to facilitate, ensure that our communities are much better. So thank you so much, Colleen, for all of that work that you do.
Ashinaling, Asante Sana. Thank you so much, Patrick, for the opportunity to chat with you. I look forward to more in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for listening to the Voices Listed podcast with Dr. P. Mac. I hope you enjoyed insights that came out of this conversation. Keep your notifications on. Our next episode will be dropping soon. Thank you and enjoy.